Welcome to SADOC with Sandra. SADOC is Hebrew for just and righteous. Our mission here is to strengthen and to develop our community through education, elevation, and empowerment. SADOC is elevating our community. We are here at season 1, episode 2, where we are on the couch with Mark Temons,
Sandra.
candidate for Pennsylvania Senate for the 31st District, building a better Pennsylvania. This episode will bring an insider's look at his personal journey, motivations, and what drives his passion for public service. Tune in to hear how Mark Temons aims to bring real change to Pennsylvania in this candid and insightful interview. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Sandra.
And may I call you Mark?
You may. You may.
Now, we were originally going to meet at your house, and then you have a whole family. So let's talk about your family, because
Okay.
I saw that you have 4 kids.
We do. So my wife, Crystal Markle Temons, and I, we got married last year. So we've been married about a year.
Okay.
And we have 4 kids between us in our blended family. Really our relationship really led us to this race. I mean, to the race for Senate as well. Was all based off of Crystal and I meeting while we were candidates for State House 2 years ago.
Oh, so she was a candidate as well.
She was a candidate for State House in our 87th district, which is where we live now, and I was a candidate across the river on the 98th district, and we met at the Plumbers and Pipefitters Union in Harrisburg at a training, and we were both single parents, and we were the victims of some bad redistricting, so we had some districts that were, tough to win, but we were a part of that class of Democrats that flipped the House, which was an amazing thing to be a part of. And then after the election, we began spending time together, and we got married, the next year.
Oh, wow, that's wonderful. And then today you said you have a full house. Is it your in-laws, and you had dogs and
just we had an extra dog.
Okay.
So I have 2 boys, and Crystal brought 2 girls, so we were like a little Brady Bunch.
Yes.
And I thought everybody was going to be gone at my mother-in-law's for Sunday supper today, but everybody was home, including an extra little dog. So we had 4 kids and 2 dogs in the house, which would have made it more difficult to film. They would have been in the background.
Yeah, I was saying that could have made for a very good blooper reel with the dogs running around and the kids running around. So, but not a lot of attention paid to it. But so you and Crystal met while campaigning. Well, what got you interested in campaigning in the first place?
Yeah, so I actually I majored in political science when I went to college. So, but I never went to law school, which is something that when you majored in political science, that most people went to law school, and I did not. Okay. This was in the late 90s, and instead I moved to New York, and I started working in New York in restaurants, and I was a waiter and a bartender. Eventually I moved to California, to San Francisco, and became a carpenter. And I grew up in Pennsylvania, so I grew up in Lock Haven, which is up in the mountains, and then moved back here about 12 years ago, moved to Lancaster County, and then 2 years ago moved to Cumberland County, where I live now.
So you also blue collar, understand the working person, understand the struggles. I think you mentioned where you and Crystal also were campaigning for, it was a union or at a union location?
Yeah, it was the Plumbers and Pipefitters. They were the ones who were hosting. And I'm a big union supporter, Sandra, and I can tell you why, because I was a residential carpenter.
Okay.
So I built homes, and in California I went to community college, City College of San Francisco, and I wanted to get into the furniture making class, but it was really popular and it was closed. So I had to get into the general construction trades class, which was fine. I was about 30 at the time, and I eventually moved to San Luis Obispo County, which is a few hours south of San Francisco, and I got a job building homes as a residential carpenter. And then I moved back to Pennsylvania, still as a residential carpenter. And now all of that to say if you're into commercial construction, maybe you get a chance to join a carpenters union. We have an awesome carpenters union that's based in Lebanon that covers our county. They have a training center and it's fantastic. But if you're a residential carpenter, then we don't really have, a carpenters union for residential carpenters. And it's a lot of sitting on your lunchbox, at break, and you say things like, folks, thank heavens our spouses have jobs with health insurance, because like we got to have a baby, and we never really had any type of, career in the type of construction that I was working. It was a lot more gigs, it was a hustle, Sandra. So as somebody, now I work, my wife owns a workforce development firm, and that's our family business, and I had gone to college.
Right.
So I had an opportunity when I'm 46, and I left, I stopped building, in the field 6 years ago. And for 4 years I designed home improvement projects, which we'll talk about because it goes into work we did in York, specifically in Harrisburg. But then, I was able to transition out and go into something else. And if you go right into a trade from high school, like we tell students now, you don't have to go to college, you can go to trade school, but like, I think it's irresponsible to tell high school students that they should go into the trades if we're not going to provide them with the type of trades jobs that provide a career that they can raise a family on. And that they have an opportunity to retire or, advance in a way, because right now for a lot of trades workers, there's no gold watch. And I worked with a lot of folks who had retired.
And just to explain the terms for people who may not gold watch retirement.
Yeah, I mean, like just the whole concept of what we used to think of, probably not you and me because we never expected that.
Right.
But like our parents, and our grandparents, they went to work, at a factory, or they went to work in manufacturing or in construction. And at the end, they had a pension, or, they had...
I know my grandmother did.
Yeah, things that we don't have, and things that you won't have unless you're...
Right.
working for a union now. So that, and also, my wife, she was an AFSCME member, was a state worker before she started her own business. And if it wasn't for that union, for state workers, then I don't think she ever would have been able to start her own business, So unions, I think, are pretty important.
Absolutely, they are. Absolutely. We have a lot of protections from that because of unions. So, all of that you've experienced, and I think you said something about you would talk a little bit more about the work that you do and all that led you into politics. Yeah.
So it was, so talking about the construction, right? This is a good thing because we'll start talking specifically about York. Our district doesn't cover Harrisburg. We should maybe tell everybody.
Right. Your district
is.
Parts of Cumberland. What parts of Cumberland, if you can say?
Yeah, absolutely. I can actually list them by municipality, but I won't.
All right.
The easiest
one.
Well,
some people honestly,
even
though it's tedious, some people just don't know.
Absolutely. So if you are in Cumberland County, if you're in Mechanicsburg or West Shore School District.
Right.
Those are the parts of Cumberland County. That's Lemoyne, New Cumberland, Lower Allen Township, Upper Allen Township where I live, and Mechanicsburg, Shiremanstown. So those are, if you're in Cumberland, and then all of Northern York is in our district, from the city of York all the way to the border at the Breaches. So if you are in the 10th Congressional District with Janelle Stelson, where she's going to win this year, then you are probably in the 31st.
Okay.
Yeah, unless you're in Springettsbury.
And by the way, we are sitting in the Northern York Dems, so you want to talk about them for
This is. Sandra knows I love talking about the Northern York Dems. If there's any of you out there watching right now, I love saying good things about you. So for the Northern York Democratic Club, they are a group of organizers who've been around since 2016, and they knock on doors. This year, they've knocked on 18,000 doors. And me being from just over the border in Cumberland County, though I had worked a lot in York, I hadn't really met. I had organized in Southern York with our congressional race down there. I managed our 2020 congressional race in the 11th congressional district, which was Sarah Hammond. and that's Southern York and Lancaster County. But when I met the Northern York Dems and realized that we had 100 people who had been knocking on doors
They're
for 8
dedicated.
years. Wow.
Yeah,
I knew we
they're
would win.
dedicated people.
I knew
That's
we
why.
would win because that's the type of structure that we need.
Yeah.
So all of that to say, that's what the district looks like, is mostly York County and then that bit of the West Shore, which was an area I was really familiar with because I had lived, when I lived in Lancaster County, I lived in Columbia. So I was always, right next to York County. And then at work, my territory covered York, Dauphin, and Cumberland counties. And what I used to do, and I also used to travel, but primarily I worked there. And for the last 4 years that I was in construction, I worked designing home improvement projects for accessibility to make homes more accessible and keep Pennsylvania seniors living in their homes through retirement. It was good because, in 4 years, I personally designed 600 projects. We worked real hard. We kept about 1,000 people living in their homes. But, Sandra, we saved at least $100 million for Pennsylvania taxpayers, right? Because we invested in keeping folks living in their homes who wanted to live in their homes. And, we didn't have taxpayers paying for them to move into nursing homes, which would have been the outcome had we not done these home improvement projects, right? So it was this way that we were, I used to always say this money isn't charity,
Right.
It's an investment.
Yes.
We're investing in keeping folks living in their homes. So I've been in a lot of bathrooms in York County. That was part of what we did is we made bathrooms more accessible. It's not the most
Okay, I was waiting on that.
I know, right? It's not the most glamorous work,
okay.
but it was, stair lifts, wheelchair ramps, the type of things that really were important. And most of the people I was working with, all of the people that we were working with, didn't have resources, outside of what we were doing. And honestly, there's other programs that we have in the Senate, now, like the Whole Home Repairs Act, which we talk a lot about. That's Nikhil Saval's plan. And the similarities between what I used to do, which by the way is not part of what we're not doing those home improvement projects that we used to do in Pennsylvania anymore. And it's because the General Assembly, changed the rules and basically put insurance companies in charge of dispersing that money. Which
I don't know how much insurance companies care about the people per se.
I do, Sandra.
Their bottom line, really.
Yeah, I know how much they care. And I mean,
Yeah.
look, so this is just this is
Right.
anecdotal. This is my one
Right.
little part of the home healthcare industry that I was a part of. But like I said, it was, 600 projects. We used to do, $100 million worth of construction a year, which, like I said, saved hundreds of millions more on top of that. And when the insurance companies took over, basically nobody got anything anymore, and they replaced this.
I mean, expected, I would think.
Yeah, and I mean, it was honestly as bad as I would think it was. I mean, you would have a participant in a wheelchair, and instead of getting a wheelchair ramp like they would have before, they would get 2 grab bars, and it's like, well, that won't work. And they would be like, no, what do you mean we gave you 2 instead of 1? Yeah, and it was really that absurd. Yeah. So all of that to say, right, like as I was seeing this change, I was actually running, and I had been involved in politics. Like I said, I had managed some campaigns. I had knocked on a lot of doors in 2018 for Jess King, who was our Southern York and Lancaster candidate as well. But I had never run for office until 2022. So when I was running for office, I was very aware that I was running for the position, that had taken away, this program, the decision making.
You wanted to be able to give input into things that you knew affected the people.
We were direct. We had direct, sort of contact with how the home, and it wasn't just me. I should say before we move on that this is. Because a lot of people watching here are going to have parents at home. Absolutely. They're going to be going through this or making decisions for themselves. And, this was home health nurses. This was physical therapists. This was the whole 9 yards of, we used to invest in taking care of folks in our home healthcare system better than we are now. And that's due to decisions that we made in the state Senate and the House. So, all of these things, it's very easy to see how decisions made in Harrisburg play into people's homes.
Absolutely.
Into their lives, yeah.
And once you see that, I think it's very important, and Carol and I had talked about this at the last episode, it's very important that once you recognize that you get involved. So there's so many ways that you can get involved. One is running. So if the people who are currently in place are not advocating for you and your community, then maybe you can be that person. Or maybe you can support someone else to be that person, and you can support someone else through financial, also by volunteering, because you talked about the Northern York Dems having 100 people volunteers.
Absolutely.
So you can volunteer by making calls, you can volunteer by doing door knocking, you can volunteer by going to the polls, and we're going to need volunteers at the polls, because we also want to make sure there's no voter intimidation going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That's I mean, with it's 2024 right now, that is a particular scary thing. I mean, those are one of the things that we want to make sure that each person who wants to vote are able to.
Yeah. And I mean, we sort of both chuckled there, because it's like, how much do you really want to get in? You know what I mean? How much do we really want to get into all of the stuff that we've seen in the past 4 years that I don't think we ever, I mean, the concerns that we had going into the 2020 election for election day, and the things that we were concerned about, I will admit that I didn't think that we would have to be concerned about in our country. Yeah.
Right. Oh, in the first place.
Well, yeah. Okay. I mean, and then 2020. So it's like, it's definitely been a different environment, which maybe this is a great time to say, that I do think that we talked about it before, that, we're Democrats, I'm a Democrat running for Democrat, or running for office, but we talk to a lot of Republicans.
Absolutely, you got to serve everyone.
And that's right, and there's a few more Republicans than Democrats in my district, so they need to, want me to win for me to win, and I'm also going to be representing all of them. And what we're noticing is sort of when we talk about voter intimidation, when we talk about this extreme right-wing movement that has obviously taken over the Republican Party, large parts.
But there are those that they're averse to it, that again we need to grab a hold of.
And I think that's what we're seeing. We're at least in York and Cumberland, where we're really seeing a rejection. And it's because, that most Republicans want you to be able to go to the polls safely. They want to have free and fair elections. My opponent, not to spend too much time on this, but because people got to know, my opponent is an election denier. She is a sitting.
And your opponent is Dawn Kiefer.
My opponent is Representative Dawn Kiefer from the 92nd. That's right.
She's currently sitting in the 92nd, but she's running for the Senate 31st district.
Yeah, she's leaving the 92nd, which is good, and she's running for the 31st. But she, this is not like a back and forth thing. She very openly opposes public education.
Right.
She would shut down public schools if given the opportunity. And I think she's proven that, even beyond some of the more shady dealings that we see, with the economic growth pack and things, just very openly in her voting record.
Right.
Is anti-public education, anti-women's reproductive rights, and these are things that we know that 75% of Pennsylvanians, Americans support.
Yes.
So, I do think that when we win this race in the 31st, that type of extremism, she'll be one of the folks that we vote out of office sort of permanently, and hopefully turn our back, on this
and we
extreme,
being the community
as a whole. Absolutely.
Yes.
America, Pennsylvania, York, all of us.
Yes. And so mentioning education, and then I think you did say that your opponent is against certain things. There's a lot of talk federally about the Department of Education. We do on the state level have a Department of Education. Do you believe that the Department of Education is important to continue to have?
Yes, because I believe that I trust teachers. My kids go to public. All four of our kids go to public school.
Yes.
And we're in a good school district. We're in Mechanicsburg, but I was in Columbia School District for a while with the boys, and I also met great teachers in Columbia School District. But for folks who don't know, it's a small school district. It's an underfunded school district, and so it's easy to we didn't have computers when the pandemic happened. We were like, what? We had no idea everybody else had computers. They were like, oh man, we had to get them. And so, it's hardware, things like that. And it's difficult to retain teachers. But all of that to say, despite the challenges, there's nobody I trust more with the education of our children than the public school teachers that I've met.
Who are in the school, who see the students, see their needs.
All of it.
Who many of times they're fundraising for pencils and books and bringing their own, you know, so to subsidize what the state should do.
I think we've seen it too, Sandra. I mean, in my experience, if you give educators money, they'll spend every dollar of it on their students. That's just, I was actually a substitute teacher for 2 years. I was
That may also be why you trust teachers.
It is, because I can't do it. I was able to. I had a good rapport with some high schools, but I was a day-to-day sub, and I taught some VOTEC classes and things. But I'm not, to be able to take a whole classroom of students and to be able to every day inspire them to that's a certain type of person, and we all have different things that we can do, and
absolutely.
So I trust teachers, and really, well, we want to talk more about public education. You got more questions?
But I had to tell Carol this. Don't worry about my face.
All right.
If you were in the middle, please continue. You finish your statement.
I think we should say about public education so that we don't forget. We should remind people that in the early 20-teens, Pennsylvania made drastic cuts to public education. So, just by the numbers, what have we seen since we made drastic cuts to public education? Well, the national average, everywhere in the country, public education is funded by a combination of state funds and property taxes from local governments, right? So the average is about 49%, about 50% to each of those. In Pennsylvania, our state's down to something like 35%, funded as a line item in the budget. So the state writes a check for only 35%.
Now, just the governor in July of this year put more money into education.
He
so
did.
Are those statistics still correct, or?
I mean, they will go up.
Okay.
Right? So we have the fair funding formula,
Yeah.
and we did not implement it across the board, as I understand. So there is still more money there, and that's.
So there was a lot more money put into education. However, of course, many advocates said it could have been even more. So yes,
it could have come to York City School District a little better. It could have come to Reading. It could have gone to Lancaster. It could have gone to Columbia. And I mean, so we're
York
missing.
got $13 million. But again, when you're talking catch up,
that's exactly.
the thing. You're talking catch up. But a lot of money did come into the city of York, but they have a long way to go.
And a lot of money, 100%, like we know, money came into York because Democrats flipped that house.
Oh, absolutely.
So, again, it's not all, especially for the people watching, it's not all about Democrat and Republican for voters, but for elected officials, we've really gotten to the point where if you're on the Republican team, you're voting against public education, you're voting against reproductive rights. So when we flipped that house, we were able to put pressure on the Senate, even though we don't control it yet.
Right.
Which is another great thing.
Right.
About
if you get elected.
Yeah.
When you get elected.
When we get elected.
Absolutely.
York,
yes.
And it will be York that does it, because it's not just a matter. So, along with being a cool district, it's a new district. We didn't even say that we redistricted in 2022.
Yes.
but we don't run for Senate every year. Senate runs every 4 years. So this is the first time that we've run this newly redistricted district, and we have a retiring incumbent, so we've never had York City with the West Shore before.
Mike Regan, who Carrollton's never really come to the city. So how about this is, cities within your jurisdiction. Will you do differently than he? Will you be visiting your various jurisdictions and showing your face and listening to what issues they have on the ground?
Yeah, this is a very fun thing for me to talk about, because I do think it's different, not just between Mike Regan and me, but between Don Kiefer and me as well, because, so I lived in Columbia, I live now, in Cumberland County. I don't live in York, but it's the only city in the 31st district. We have some cool towns, in Cumberland and York, but the only real city, and, that's important, right? Like, so having been living in Columbia, having been working in York County for so long, I feel like York, I want to represent York.
Yes.
And I don't know, honestly, that Mike Regan or Don Kiefer, like, I feel like they inherited the city as part of this new district, and that but I'm excited, to work with folks, because I've also always gotten cut out of the city organizing with that southern district. For Congress, we never got to organize with the city. So I've been wanting this for a long time. And then also it's about bringing, like we said, the places where I know that we can impact the most through investments, like we used to make in homes, like we're making in homes. That's in the city, the places where we can really make a difference in education right now, like that's in the city. Not that there aren't underfunded parts of York County where we're sitting now, because there are, and they'll benefit as well. But I do think, and for me, like, I want to be there in the office. I want constituent services to be a big part of what we do, like as a senator. Like, it's I started as a community organizer. Okay. So for me, like, it's really all about like what we can do in the community, like what we can do. And as a senator, a lot of times my job is to make sure that they have that opportunity,
Yeah, I would say starting as a community organizer, you have to listen to the community. You have to have boots on the ground, to be successful as one. So, I think that's a good background for what you're saying you want to achieve. The other recommendation I'm going to make is always make your office inclusive. Yeah. So I hope that also that's something that you would do, especially having those in the city, and some of the counties are multicultural, multilingual. So just be mindful.
Absolutely, yeah.
So more specifically to the education, which I did want to ask, is what are your positions on vouchers and school choice?
Yeah, so for school choice, I want to start there because it is a phrase that's used against us. Where in reality, I certainly support parents sending their children to private schools, whatever schools they want, as far as whatever decision is best for their family. We certainly have friends who go to different Waldorf or Montessori schools. People do all sorts of make all sorts of choices for public education, and it's always going to depend on the kid. So it's not like you don't have a choice. All we are saying is that you can't take public tax dollars, and privatize them virtually into your own pocket, and then give them to a cyber charter school who's got a 50% graduation rate, and it's quite clearly sort of in it for the business of not educating students, but for making profit, So I think that, again, when it's addressed that way, everybody's kind of on our side, but you
want the money to go to the education of the students,
and we still don't have enough. Like we still don't have enough for our public education. So it's like we're not like dealing from a position of abundance here, and it's also the choice of the vast majority of students. We do hear that where's the accountability? It's like, well, the only accountability that we have in education is in our public schools a lot of times. There's no accountability in a lot of the cyber charter schools. I mean, certainly not with a 50% graduation rate. And that doesn't mean that there aren't some of them doing better than that.
Right.
But it does, like, we're not talking about individual sort of assessments of schools here. We're talking about systemic solutions, and the systemic solution largely is to fund public education.
And so you did mention about teachers and having a respect for teachers. One of the things that Pennsylvania is dealing with for the quality that affects quality of education, public education, is the declining numbers of qualified people becoming or wanting to become certified as teachers. So is there anything that you would be proactive for to help address that?
Yes. So gotta support PSEA, who we are endorsed by PSEA, the state teachers union. They're a big part of our team, and they're going to have recommendations, for pay grades and for all of that. But I want to sort of talk with you like we'll just say, I think that a lot of the reason why people wouldn't want to be teachers is it's not very fun anymore when you have the backlash that you do in a lot of our communities. Certainly in the 31st district, I'm thinking West Shore School District, I'm thinking Cumberland Valley, which is right next door, I'm thinking Dover, where we know we have some school boards that are very actively anti-teacher, and I don't think that I would want to be
anti-history.
Anti-history.
If you happen to be a teacher who wants to accurately teach history, then you're opposed by your own school board and maybe targeted.
Or if you believe that everybody in your entire school has equal rights, then you're some type of groomer, which is like, these some of the accusations, Sandra, and I mean, I'm going to go ahead and say that, like, the way that they fight is not fair, and it's barely legal sometimes. Sometimes it's probably illegal, and there's really just nobody to do anything about it. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that, like, being in that environment is not always. I don't know that that's going to entice students like it did 10 years ago when we didn't really see this. And again, it's part of this movement that I do think we're turning away from, because I do think that most people respect the teachers in their school. I do think that most people know that, like, they might not like it, Sandra. Like, plenty of people might not like our history, and that's a good feeling, because some of it's uncomfortable.
And we won't repeat it. If we know it, then hopefully, if we don't like it, then we should not be repeating it versus saying we're going to go back to it.
Plenty of it was bad, and that should make y'all uncomfortable. But, like, I do think that by and large, people know that, Sandra, I've actually been really, I've been very encouraged lately by how many people I believe know the truth, and not to, like, make excuses, but I think that, like, there's a lot, and, for voters, I mean, like, there's a lot of voters who really just didn't believe, that we would get to the place where we were like, it'll be fine. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine. They don't really mean what they say. They're not really going to try to do what they say they're going to try to do. And then when it happens, it's like total surprise.
And, like, just to sum up, like, what exactly we mean by that, I mean, and this is what people are starting to realize. What that movement promises to do is break things. And that is the reality of it. They're like, they don't come offering solutions. Like, my opponent does not come into the State House of Representatives offering solutions. She offers, she's like, we're gonna break all of this. And it's like, you can't actually do that. It's like these programs that are keeping people in their homes, public education, healthcare, Like, these are all things that people are working very hard to make sure that work. And when you have this House, this General Assembly
Right.
that is deliberately sowing chaos, and mismanagement, I think that we're seeing the results of that, and people are a little fed up. So yeah.
So, making the atmosphere palatable, even, friendly for teachers is one potential solution. How about, would you support the forgiving of the student loans, especially when they're into public service work like teachers?
Yeah, we're on your. We're just going to have to be real about the reality of people's student loans, because again, I think a lot of people know we're of that age where we took out these student loans.
Right.
I paid way more money.
Yeah.
Way more money on my student loan than I borrowed.
Right, exactly.
Before it
Those
was
interest
forgiven.
rates.
Yeah.
Oh, those interest rates are killers.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and they opened the first, like, whenever teachers and public service employees got the first,
Waive of
program.
forgiveness. Yes.
4% of people got accepted into that program. It took almost a decade
Right.
to get it to where it actually helped people. So all of this to say, there's no question of fairness
Right.
when it comes to student loans. Like, the
Right.
question is, and money's a good one, because sometimes people forget that when you spend money in the economy, it doesn't go anywhere. It stays in the economy, right? Like, when you spend money and you buy things, that becomes products, it becomes jobs. Money doesn't disappear out of the economy until it gets packed into somebody's bank account, right? Until it goes into personal wealth. So
Maybe like these billionaires.
And it's such an obvious example, but I mean, like, that's
Yeah.
it. It's just basic math. Like, if Elon Musk has all that money, we don't.
Right.
So what were we saying about the economy? Like, this
Well,
basic.
so we were talking
We're in the
about
economy now.
we were talking about the student loans.
Oh, the student
forgiveness.
loans, exactly.
And that point that you made is valid. That if they're forgiven, that money they're being forgiven is going to go back into the economy. That's more spending power.
Yeah.
So it opens up, and I know because a couple of friends of mine received that forgiveness. So it opens up a new world for them to be debt free.
That's right. I mean, it goes into, and I mean, it's just as simple as that money either goes to a tiny market of folks who are going to benefit from the banks making their usurious interest rates back, or it's going to go somewhere else,
And
somewhere
go to
better.
families.
Almost
go to
guaranteed.
families,
Yeah.
so they can pay for education. They can pay for goods and other services.
And I mean, we're up against it, Sandra. Like, the numbers for families, they don't add. Like, you can't just. It's not about eating less avocado toast. I think that we've all really realized that. So if you make those people pay those student loans, that they won't have money to invest in those other things, and we will have a slower economy. And just again, in fairness to say, we forgave a lot of, what were the PPP loans or whatever they were, didn't we?
Absolutely.
I mean,
and again, I gotta say, I'm a business that received one as well.
I wish I was.
That's that small business help. So,
Yeah.
But so one thing before we leave education, and some initiatives that were proposed, I want to ask you if you would have supported qualified non-citizens who have all the proper visas getting certified as teachers to address the teacher shortage.
Yes.
Okay.
Is that a thing? That's an amazing idea.
Yeah, that was something that your opponent opposed.
Oh, I'm not so. She opposes everything.
So that's why some things. So you also talked about when you were speaking about education, and you spoke about how your property taxes, I believe you mentioned, is a part of that helps fund education.
Yeah.
So many are concerned about high property taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So what, besides the state subsidizing education, so we already talked about that, what other type of help could there be for homeowners in their property taxes?
Yes. So first off, just to double down, the big one is the state paying its
Yes.
fair share. And you know, the reason for that is that it's probably our property taxes about it. I almost wanted to propose funding public education specifically as property tax relief. You know, I mean, like, there's probably
You're saying the state give 100%.
I'm just saying that, like, the more money the state directly
Okay,
gives,
yeah.
it's a direct
Yes.
impact on your property taxes. So it's a fairly drastic decrease that we could see, you know, in you know, and maybe like a quarter of your property taxes could be
Right.
eliminated through that. Now then, you know, after that, we also have, I know, bills that have been proposed for senior citizens to have relief from their property. I think Carol has
Yes,
a
she
bill,
did.
right?
She talked about that.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And I think that we should do anything we absolutely can once public education is funded. So if we have enough of a surplus that we can start giving it back to communities, you know, starting with senior citizens that need it, then heck yeah. You know, once we get to fair and adequately funded, the thing is it's not even us saying it. You know, we have a constitutional mandate,
Right.
and we have a you know, Commonwealth Court ruling that
Yes,
says we're not
right.
meeting it.
Right,
You know, it's like
exactly.
the General Assembly. And I do think it's interesting, Sandra. You know, our opponents, they're constitutionalists. You know, they're all about
Right.
all
Oh,
about
good
this
point.
Constitution
Good point.
until it's like you must, you know,
Yeah.
fund public education, which is in the
Right.
Pennsylvania Constitution for folks who don't know.
Absolutely.
And that's this, you know, the
Yeah.
Supreme Court and then
And,
the
and
Commonwealth
they voted
Court.
against the budget.
They vote
So
yes.
Dawn Kiefer voted against the budget as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, so speaking about the cost of living, of course, besides property taxes, there's also young people, millennials, and you know, Gen Xers.
Yeah.
All of us are speaking about the high cost of rents, the high cost of food, groceries, gas. What, if anything, do you believe you're able to do in your Senate position?
I think we should pass the minimum wage law.
Okay.
I think that you know, high cost of living, and this is something that you and I have witnessed over the course of our life in the economy personally, as you know, students who went to college when we did and have seen the economy change over the course of our lifetime. You know that a union carpenter was making almost as much money per hour the year I was born in 1978 as what I was making the year that I retired from the field, you know,
Oh, wow.
2020 or whatever. So, you know, more or less, it's like what we really saw, you know, since the 80s, 90s, and as we've seen 40 years of wages not increasing.
Being
So
stagnant,
it
yes,
really, you know, so that
yes.
includes the minimum wage,
Right.
but it also, you know, it includes wages for college educated folks, wages for trades workers. A big part of that is that we used to have 35% union registration
Right.
in this country, you know, in 1979. And then we had a very pointed and specific union busting movement straight from the, you know, executive office at the White House down. And we're down to 11%.
Right.
And so that's going to, so yes, stuff does cost a lot more than it used to, but in a lot of ways, I feel like the cost of things has moved more normally,
Right.
whereas the wages just have not done anything. And then it should also be said that, you know, when we first entered the workforce, we had free phones, you know, like that didn't,
Right.
that weren't a cell phone,
Right.
that didn't cost money, you know, like we didn't have the TV bills, like, you know, so everything that sort of is added on
Yes.
to the cost, you know, a millennial's reality for their home office is a lot different than in older generations, you know.
Absolutely. So you would support raising the minimum wage. The minimum wage is currently $7.25. That's the federal minimum wage as well as Pennsylvania's minimum wage. What would you support as far as raising the minimum wage to what? I think Carol Hill Evans was speaking about, there were some talks about 1010. We were also talking about advocacy groups really realized that a livable wage, you got the minimum, the bare minimum, and then you have what you can really live off of would be $20.25. So we're in that. would you be willing to support?
It would be amazing to get to 15. That's been a national movement for a long time.
It has been a long time. That's why now it's like really at 20, but
It
we
is.
got to try. If we can at least move that scale somewhere. 'Cause
Yeah.
as you said, products and everything is increasing as it naturally would. The cost of doing business, they're going to pass that on to consumers, but the consumers' wages are not rising equally.
Yep.
So, and that's government.
And I've lived places where we have a higher, San Francisco, New York City.
Right.
These are places where you have a higher than national average minimum
Right.
wage. I don't think anybody is saying that, like, oh my gosh, look, New York City's high minimum wage is crippling the city. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
Like, you lift everybody up together. So, I don't think that we're going to get $20 an hour passed, but that would be awesome. 15 would be a great place to start.
Right.
12 if we can't. And all of this to say, because there's also, I think it's important to say that there's not that many jobs that are going to be affected by raising the minimum wage. The longer it goes, the more we have, like, jobs in construction. You start a basic job in construction, now you're probably making $12 an hour for no, with like no training. It's just, so there's already this competitive nature of wages, which we also saw after the pandemic, right? I mean, we're making a lot more money now because I said after the pandemic, speaking of unions, that it was something of like a nationwide wildcat strike. They were like, oh, nobody wants to work anymore. It's like, well, maybe just nobody wants to work bad jobs anymore.
Yes, absolutely. And that bad, quote unquote, is also the atmosphere.
Exactly.
So that acceptance, that inclusion, the ability to grow and advance.
Yeah.
So all of that is equated, because reality is, and I spoke to actually a client of mine who said this: a person would take a lower wage if they saw advancement. So they just have to see some light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
But a lower wage plus no advancement plus a bad atmosphere, that's when it's the quote unquote bad jobs. Yeah.
And then, we would be totally remiss if we went without saying that it's very, like, when I did say that there's not, that there's not that many jobs that are affected.
Right.
The jobs that are affected, it's important to say the jobs where people are making $7.25 an hour. Very often, as somebody who's worked in communities with people who are coming out of prison, who's worked in communities where people are coming out of addiction treatment places, right? Or and they're getting those low, like the jobs that are in that market are the jobs where people are not able to get the child care like off. They're not able to get they tend to be jobs where folks they're the most sort of exploitative jobs, right, in our industry. So just for that reason alone, we really need to be pushing to give a leg up to those folks who are in those situations, because making $7.25, you're never going to pull yourself out of poverty at that rate. Like it can't happen. And then that plays into the fact that we also have a lot of low paying. Remember, we had the SEIU healthcare strike a couple years ago, and we have an industry, that is mostly dominated by women, right? Mostly dominated by women of color. And what do we see? It's just statistically, systemically, a much lower wage paying, because there seems to be some acceptance, that, like, that's okay, which
this is, what do you, like they say about the McDonald's worker, what do you expect?
Exactly.
So go get a real job, but they don't want to pay for education.
No.
So you get what you're able to get, but you should be able to live off of that work you're putting in.
Yeah, and what's the demand of, like, go get a real job? It's like, what are we supposed to do with this job? If we want to have these stores open, like, you're just accepting that there's going to be not good jobs. And why would we want that? Because it's just when there's no there's a lot of money honestly, for corporations and businesses to save in not having turnover, in not having expensive HR departments, you know, like for employees to come and go. There are benefits to stability and reliability. My wife is a workforce development professional, you know, like this is what we do.
Right.
So even in the work that we do on farms, you know, we see that when people are making living wages, you know, and have reliable workforces, that helps, you know, lift all ships, so to speak.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, from the debate last week, we
That awesome debate.
We heard the no taxes on tips.
Yes.
So tips means a tip worker has a minimum wage of $2.13. $2.13, and then they expect to supplement that wage up to $7.25 by tips. That allows the employer not to pay the $7.25 to the worker. If you just pay the worker the minimum wage, then you don't have to worry about that no tax on tips.
Absolutely.
The average worker who's making those type of tips would probably get a tax credit anyway because they're lower income.
Yep.
There's very few that's going to be that high income. So this is why I like to educate on these smoke and mirrors, you know, so because not everyone knows about all that or thinks about all of that. You know, those type of quips are not really helpful to the community. Raise the minimum wage.
Yeah.
That's it. Raise the minimum wage. Don't talk, all that is smoke and mirrors. Well, we're going to not tax your tips.
Yeah.
Well, how about I get a minimum wage and what if I get some tips? How
you know,
about that?
And I think, Sandra, there's probably not a lot of people who have lived off of tips, you know, who are running for Senate this year, who have lived off of tips for as much of their life.
And you said you were a bartender,
I was
right?
a bartender, you know, so when I moved to New York, you know, I went to New York after college, and I was 23, and it was 2001. I got there days before 9/11, actually, when I finally moved there for good.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very different. Sandra, that more than, like, you know, I had always, where I grew up in Pennsylvania, like we were as close to New York City as Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, right? So a lot of folks, when we moved to the city, if you were the type who wanted to move to the city, you might move to New York. And, you know, I had experienced in New York growing up in the 80s.
Right.
You know, so like I never, like when I had to check later, you know, when I got older, like, did we really see people? Remember, they were in boxes. You know, it was like something that they used to put on the TV.
Right.
Like, it was such a homeless thing. And I never seen it. Like when I went, like I was 5. The first time I went to New York, and I was so blown away by inequality and homelessness that like it has basically been what I've worked to eliminate ever since. And then, you know, post 9/11, we really did have a city in New York that it felt like people my age, like we were all contributing to building a new community together. So all of that to say, I did live in New York, but I worked for tips. I was a waiter, and I made $2.25 an hour, like you said. For a while, I made $5 an hour. When I was a head bartender, I made $5 an hour. But what would happen is you would get these wages, and you would have your tips. Your wages would be all taxed away,
right?
Because they would assume, like, people think that you don't pay taxes on your tips.
Right.
Now you actually do. They assume that you make a certain amount. And your credit cards get. Now all of that to say, like, give people, like, have an economic plan that includes, like, not taxing tips. Like you said, I guess that's okay. Like, it wouldn't hurt, you know. Like maybe we can throw that into our, like, actual overall bag of a holistic plan. You know, I would work that into and holistic plan, but ideally I'd rather not, because I would come, like, I'd see that whole industry go away right now. Honestly, it's another one of those industries that's exploitative, Sandra. I mean, like, you think you can just not pay somebody, you know, because like the service wasn't good enough? Like, stop.
Well, that's right. But again, not only that, it is because the employers aren't really paying the wages. They're getting the consumers, the customers, to subsidize those wages. And then, as you just pointed out, if that customer is disgruntled or just don't want to tip, then now you're getting cheated out of your wages.
You're gonna love this, actually. So, you know, I think of a couple things working in
Yeah.
restaurants, because this is great. When I worked in restaurants in New York City, they stopped smoking in restaurants.
Right. Okay.
Which, as a bartender and I had longer hair, then we were like, awesome.
Right.
So like we can stop going home smelling like an ashtray, right?
Right.
And they were like, well, nobody will go to restaurants anymore, right? Like, come on.
Oh, yeah, it's
Like,
always, yes.
I'm here to tell you,
Yes.
we saw zero difference
Right.
in the number of people attending restaurants in New York City when we banned smoking. So fast forward to when I moved to San Francisco. This is San Francisco that had the district attorney was Kamala Harris, which
Okay.
is a story I like to tell. I got
All
to
right.
vote for Kamala Harris for district attorney of San
Okay.
Francisco. And Gavin Newsom was the mayor, and he was marrying gay people, even though like it wasn't legal in the rest of the country. It was a very cool time to be in San Francisco. But one of the things that had just happened there is I was making $11.50 an hour as a bartender, because they had a rule in San Francisco that you could pay, $2.25 or whatever, but they got rid of it on the city council a couple years before I moved there, and they had, lifted, everybody had the same minimum wage. So if you were a tipped employee, you still had to make a minimum wage. And you know what they said? Like, they said that of course all the restaurants in San Francisco would close because they couldn't afford to pay that.
Okay.
Do you know that they didn't? Like,
Right, of course.
San Francisco is still full of restaurants,
Yes.
but except for now, they actually just get paid a decent wage.
Yes.
They have, and it makes a huge difference
Right.
in the lives of people coming right out of college or for whatever, in everybody's life. It makes it a true job, instead of like a gig.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's always going down.
Right.
Yep.
And some people want to continue to waiter or waitress, or it's not just a gig to them, it's what they want to do.
A lot more people than, the most stressful thing about that job is not knowing how your night is going to go.
Right.
Not knowing how much money
Yeah.
you're going to walk with. It's just not a fair way to send people into our economy in this country, with that type of uncertainty. Some people are, well, that was me. Some people are always gonna like it, and there's a
Right.
certain amount of freedom there. But no, I think we could just do away with the whole exploitative industry, like you said.
So you mentioned the homeless, the unhoused, and you mentioned how you've worked in that arena to try to make a difference, and that's what you want to do as a senator. So there's a lot of talk in the community about immigration and immigrants affecting the availability of affordable housing and contributing to citizens, quote unquote, not receiving services or just remaining homeless while immigrants are getting these services. So what do you say about that? What is your impression as that is being discussed in the community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one thing that makes, when I moved back to Pennsylvania, I wouldn't have moved back to a place unless I was going to raise my kids here and want them. And this is a place where I feel like they can live, they can stay here, they don't have to move. Like where I grew up, I love it, it's beautiful, but I felt like I had to go somewhere when I grew up, I had to go and I wanted to live somewhere, that had more of an economy where they didn't have to do that. So I love it here. And one of the things I think that keeps this area active and vibrant and not backwards is we actually are predisposed to welcome immigration.
Right.
And not just from like our past, not just from our families and our ancestors, but you have Lancaster County has 23 times the immigration rate, of the average of the country. York, Lancaster, Harrisburg, Cumberland County, we have a lot of immigration to this day, which means that we have a lot of people interacting with immigrants. And what we know is that when you interact with people who are actually going through the immigration process, that you're not as susceptible to these stories that you hear.
That they're getting special benefits or anything like that.
Yeah, I really, in my experience, when people are coming here, first it's a long process. It is hard, asylum, refugee status is long, it's hard, it takes 10 years. People spend decades in refugee camps being vetted. You know, it's like you always
Right.
hear about how we don't know who's coming in. That's simply not the case.
Right.
You know, I mean, we have a certain number of visas, and if we don't, you know, honor them, or there's more people
Right.
than we have visas for, then we do have a crisis at the border. Now, you know, I guess over the past 20 years, we do see times when the border has like a major influx of people moving from South America, right? But it always follows economic instability in South America. So, with the, you know, those are bigger federal problems.
Right.
There's always going to be
For
people.
Pennsylvania down here.
For
at your
Pennsylvania
level,
down
at
here
your
at our level, there's always going to be people that want to move to this country. There's
Uh-huh.
always going to be people that want to move to Pennsylvania. And anything that we can do to bring now, the homelessness is not an either or thing. You know,
Right.
it's never going to be immigration policy
Right.
that keeps a veteran homeless.
Right.
Like those two things simply are
Yeah.
not related.
You have to deal with the PTSD. You have to deal with a lot of the mental health issues.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've worked also with some unhoused, and sometimes they do not want to come inside.
Sure.
They do not want the human interaction as much, you know. So,
And we don't have, you know, this is something that is an issue because I live in the fastest growing county, Cumberland County in Pennsylvania, and we see it though, you know, all through York, houses
Right.
and housing going up all over the place. But we don't have a lot of housing that is very entry level basic. You know,
Right.
some communities, some bigger cities,
Right.
you see the SROs, they used to call them like a single room occupancies
Right.
and things.
Yes.
But there is a lot more transition housing
right.
in places than where we live. So there's just no way that we're going to fix this problem without building some type of infrastructure to solve it. You know, like we
Right.
need, when we say we need affordable housing, and we don't do a terrible job of it all the time in Cumberland County, we really don't. But we still need to remain focused on making sure that we have homes, apartments, you know, like for people to move into.
Right.
Or
And then Carol was talking about the use of the abandoned buildings like shopping malls or grocery stores. Would you support that as well?
yes, and what we
Okay.
need is construction investment because, you know, we always see like we build a lot of new schools, right? Like, and people are
Yes.
like, oh, why did we build a new school? And you hear like, well, it costs more money to renovate the old one. You know, that's true. Like, you know,
Right.
keeping and code is important. You know, building code is important.
Right.
Upgrading buildings is important, but it's also expensive.
Right.
Now, that's where we go back to one of those issues. Like, this is not charity.
Yes.
This is an investment. Like, there is no excuse. And we live in a place in Pennsylvania, like most of the state, that has a lot of old housing stock. You know, we've had folks living here for a very long time. So it's absolutely wasteful to let it sit there and deteriorate. You know,
Right.
like but we need to invest, and
Yeah.
it's going to mean putting money into it. One thing we like to say, you know, is when you don't take care of your things, you get broken things and more
Absolutely.
bills.
Absolutely.
You know,
And so where you talk about how high the rent is going, remember one suggestion that Mark made was that we will increase or work to increase raising the minimum wage. That gives you more money to pay for these rising costs. And then also making more units available because supply and demand. When the demand is high, supply is low, prices rise. So those are the types of things for some of the comments that I do see. There was a question that I received about equal access. And a young woman was concerned, probably knowing other single fathers, but she raised the question of equal access. She sees a lot of programs for single mothers, but not a lot for single fathers. So again, as a senator, I see that as equal access. It's the same thing where, say, Black Americans say immigrants are coming in and they're getting housing help, but I'm not. That's all about equal access. So how would you help to improve equal access?
Specifically, I really like the programs with the childcare. So this is an amazing time because we didn't expand upon this talking about public education.
Okay.
But if we want to have, this is great
Yeah.
because I have a kindergartner. You know, Crystal and I,
Yeah,
our
okay.
youngest, just went to kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know? I mean, you know, it's so awesome the money that we saved in
Right.
childcare because she's now in public school.
Yes.
And we've all experienced that. So if we're going to have these childcare options, expanding public education and building them out of the public school system, I think is the most obvious way to do
Right.
that. So that's when we talk about like, once we get our public schools funded fairly, we don't have to stop there. You know, we
Right.
could just have the best schools in the whole country,
Right.
and keep putting the money in. Because again, those folks who are having their kids with some publicly funded, you know, especially single parents at a publicly funded childcare program, they're just going to work and they're
Right.
just going to spend that money in our economy. And you know, it's not always easy to see the effects immediately. But when everybody's working, slowly that's when you see, and if we advocate for it, not just by magic, but so
Yes.
long as we keep
Well,
advocating,
yes.
then you see the wages,
Yes.
you know, and the costs start to
Okay.
shrink back together again. And you know, we haven't really talked much about it, but we did talk about like some of the wage disparity, and just in general, you know, York is, you know, the places that we're not funding public education. Like, you know, you're
Right.
going to notice that there's like a trend there, you
Of
know,
course.
and they are, you know, places where we have a lot of folks of color, places, you know, and it's, so
Economically disadvantaged.
economically disadvantaged.
Absolutely.
And, you know, it's one of those times where, you know, like people might not like to hear the
Right.
history of how this happened, but it's right there in front of them. I mean, like, how about Black Americans didn't get that GI Bill? You know, I mean, like, that should really mean something to
Right.
people, because if you're a middle class white person in this economy, like, there's a very good chance that every bit of your family's generational wealth came from that GI Bill. You know, when your parents came back
And
from
you're
World
talking
War
about
II.
historically versus today.
Well, I mean, like, historically, if you don't
Yes.
fix it, you know,
Right.
like, it's
Right.
it's not like, you know, we have to really go back in, and when you need to invest in equalizing.
Right.
So equal access, and you'll sometimes hear, you know, that like, oh, everything's equal now. You know what I mean? Like, we don't discriminate
Yes,
now, and
yes.
it's like, well, you do,
Yes.
you know, like, you do a little bit still, but also, like, you can't just like have a group of people who like start behind, and then you're
Yes.
like, oh, sorry, we'll fix that,
Right.
you know, and then you just move on, you
Right.
know, and I think that that's still what we're seeing, because it just requires intention. You
Right.
know, you can't, things don't just inertia themselves
Right.
to write.
Well, exactly. So, how about small business help? What would you support to help small businesses?
This is great. So small business is a really I think, understood sort of. So the vast majority of small businesses are like ours, right? Like when I say ours, I mean Crystal's workforce development firm, Boss and Girl Leadership. So we have some folks that we contract with, you know, that are independent contracts, but it's mostly a family-owned business, right? Like, and it's family who works for it. So the vast majority of small businesses in Pennsylvania, unless you count a small business as one that's like, you know, 100 employees or less, which is not like the same, you know. So speaking of truly small businesses where you have like an employee or two, I think that's the vast majority of them. And then also you have a lot of those industries that I came from, construction and restaurants, where you might have like 15 employees, you know. So the biggest deal for small business, as I see it, is to not give all of the financial breaks to big business. You know, like even like, you know, whenever we're bidding for jobs, we're always bidding against these global corporations.
Yes, absolutely. Right? And hoping that they're going to subcontract to a smaller business or a multicultural business. Yeah,
That's exactly what it
typically
is.
what's done.
And so it's the level of privatization.
Right.
And it
Right.
sounds kind of wonky, but in
Right.
reality, what happened to that home health care business that I was a part of? Now remember that it's not just old people staying in their homes, right? It's millions of nurses, it's
Right.
millions of physical therapists, it's millions of jobs, and not just the millions of jobs for them, it's the millions of jobs for family members of the folks that were living at home who don't have to be home because
Right.
there's a nurse there. So it's this giant economy, and basically it was privatized to the health insurance company, and you have a situation now where we're still spending all of that money.
Right.
It's not turning into home improvement projects. What's it turning into?
Right.
It's turning into paperwork, and it's turning into subcontracting levels. So the job that I used to do as a designer of these products, I can tell you that in Pennsylvania right now that there's 4 different levels of people
Right.
doing the same job that I used to do. So what you have is you have 4 jobs that are probably not as good as the one that I used to have.
Right.
That people are going through, and in the end we're not getting anything out of it. So all of that to say, if you're a small business, what do you really need is you need to just be able to be competitive. Like not have another bigger company. Just give us an opportunity.
Right.
Like if there's contract, we win those contracts, like we'll perform. Like we're good at what we do, and I think that that's a lot of small businesses.
Right.
Construction is another one. Like, look, when we talk about these union, there's no union construction companies in these residential construction. Does that mean an investment of a public infrastructure? Maybe. Does that scare people, like big government, a little bit?
Right.
Like maybe. But like when you look, like if you don't have big government, all you're going to get is big corporation.
Right.
And like only one of them lets us vote, Sandra.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
we don't get to vote. We don't get to vote for Tesla. But
Right.
we do get to vote. For who's in charge of our government. So,
Absolutely.
we should sometimes remember that when we think of government as the enemy, at least it's us.
And that's why companies like Tesla and the big corps are trying to minimize our votes.
Exactly.
But you know what? I believe we started about 3:30.
Yes.
It's almost 5.
No way. We did so good.
So what I want to do is do a lightning round.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay, so open government. Would you support state and local governments being mandated to make digital content available on websites?
Yes.
Okay. Would you be for or against requiring any constitutional amendment to be only placed on the ballot during the general election and when it's either a presidential or governor election?
Yes. That way more people show up, I guess, is the principle
Bingo.
behind that. Yeah, definitely.
Bingo.
Although
That's exactly, yes.
That being said, I would love it if we made it more accessible for our, I would like to see every year's elections, even the non-presidential ones, have a higher turnout.
Yeah.
And I think
that would always be
Yeah.
great, but when you know that for the most part, people would vote are more likely to
Yeah.
vote during the general election, and they're more likely to vote when it's a presidential election or they're electing the governor, then if you're going to try to sneak a constitutional amendment in, it should be during the general election where the voter turnout is the most high.
I agree.
Rather than one of those quote unquote off year elections when barely anybody's going to show up and you're trying to sneak a constitutional amendment in. So again, reproductive freedom. Would you support the insurance company paying for all contraceptive services regardless of income?
Yes.
For free?
Yes.
Okay, great. Actually, this is a question I received, so I'm going off of the speed round. It's another question I received. So a young millennial asked the question of Roe versus Wade overturned the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade to now the decisions of whether or not a person can seek an abortion is up to the states. So this young woman asks, in a fearful state, what other rights can I potentially lose?
Oh my gosh.
So, again, as
Your right
a
to
woman,
vote.
right,
I mean,
to
right
vote,
off the bat.
right,
Yeah. Your right to an education.
right,
We do have, again, privatization. We have this effort to privatize public schools, and that that's going to mean that some people don't get one, like
Right.
everything else in the private market. So those are the two biggest ones. People need money, Sandra. They need,
Yeah,
people need livable wages,
right,
or
right, yeah.
everything.
The right to a
breaks.
quality life.
Yeah.
Because being able to afford basics is a quality of life.
Yep.
Okay, so back to the speed round. LGBTQIA plus rights. Currently, you said, your opponent said they're constitutionalists. And another Pennsylvania statute that has been declared unconstitutional is the marriage definition. So the Supreme Court in 2015 declared that it's unconstitutional, that's U.S. Supreme Court, to say marriage is only between a man and a woman, and Pennsylvania still says that. So would you support statute to amend that statute?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second one, would you support expanding the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission to include sexual orientation and gender identity?
Yes, definitely.
Immigration rights. First of all, do they deserve rights?
Yes.
Okay. I already asked that question about the teachers. So I'm actually going to, you mentioned something about, I believe you mentioned earlier about domestic workers, farm workers. So do you support domestic workers and agricultural workers being protected by the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission?
Absolutely.
Act?
Yeah. And I'll say really quick that Bossy Girl Leadership, which is my wife's firm, we actually are contracted right now with the Commonwealth to make the H-2A migrant worker program, which brings workers from other countries to meet the workforce development needs, of harvesting, specifically at vineyards and other farms, not dairy farms. And we actually get our hands dirty is the point, and we make the program work better.
And is it because those that are here and are available do not want to work those type of jobs?
It's a lot of things. I mean, we know what you really need when you're going to harvest is you need somebody who's going to be there from the beginning to the end.
Beginning to the end meaning what?
Of like the harvest.
Okay.
So that you're not, looking for somebody when your grapes are sitting on the vine. When it's time to go, when you're harvesting, it's time to go. So the reliable workforce that's often like right there is something that there's a lot of federal government involvement on, like where like the wages are, how long our agriculture. Pennsylvania is unique in that we have these family-owned farms, and you got to remember that we're honestly playing in a ball game that's built for the Midwest and California and their giant farms. So it's but all of that to say that when we do have people, it doesn't solve any grand immigration problems, but it does make those folks' lives better here in Mexico, where a lot of them are coming from. We were just at a farm out in Greenberg last week and talking to the workers there about their experience, about what we can do to make it better. So like we said, get in there and get it done.
All right, so back to the speed round.
Yeah, speed round.
For or against abolishing the death penalty?
Abolish it. I don't think it has the deterrent effect people think it does.
Right. Okay, criminal justice. Would you support medical assistance re-entry, meaning that people who are leaving prison would continue to receive medical assistance so that when they get out, they don't lose their mental health, their substance abuse treatment? Would you support that?
Absolutely.
Would you support a task force on reviewing the Pennsylvania criminal statute to remove anything that's duplicate or not consistent?
Yes, and we also need to take care of some of our mandatory minimums that are putting way too many people in prison.
Yes. Well, yes, absolutely. Some of those were already declared unconstitutional as well. So We don't have a lot of those, but yeah.
And our 43% of our population in local jails that are there for parole and probation violations.
Absolutely.
We have one of the most onerous probation programs in the country. So,
Okay.
yep.
Back to the speed round.
Speed round.
All right. So, would you support the Department of Correction, Department of Transportation, Department of Human Services working together to help transition those who are incarcerated being released into the community, obtaining their driver's license, identification, and work permits?
Yes.
Would you support the Clean Slate 3.0, where drug felonies and property-related felonies would be eligible more sooner to have their criminal record sealed to help them become more employable and to solve the worker shortage?
Yes, and effectively sealed. That doesn't work half the time, is the way it is now.
Exactly. Would you support confirming to the district justices that they can actually allow community service in lieu of fines?
Yes.
Would you support limiting the types of offenses where the DNA for juveniles are collected and that they will be automatically expunged once the expungement becomes eligible?
Definitely.
Okay. Would you support a statewide Indigent Defense Advisory Committee in a grant fund for the state to fund public defenders?
Good heavens, yes.
Yes.
Public defenders are tragically underfunded.
And Pennsylvania is the only state that does not fund from state funds the public defender's office. The state allows just the counties to do so.
I don't know how we're not unconstitutional on that one yet.
Yeah, you would think so. So again, it's if you say you have a right to counsel, an effective counsel, you have to put money into the public defender's office so they could be more effective, so they can have all the resources. So I thank you for being here. Mark
Sandra,
Temons.
hold on.
Yes.
One more thing, ready? So
Okay.
the last speed round.
All right.
Independents can vote in primaries. I want to say that.
Oh,
because
that's what you want to support.
I want to say that
You wanna
we were
support
talking
that.
about it on TV, and I wanted to
Okay.
make sure I got it in there. Not both primaries, and I don't want to see Democrats voting in Republican primaries or
Right.
vice versa.
Right.
But I think that we're one of few states, 12 maybe states, where independents
Not
can't vote
no
at all.
open primary,
Yeah,
right? So you
open.
support an open primary.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So again, thank you, Mark Temons, candidate for Senate District 31st District. And that covers parts of Cumberland, all of City of York, and parts of York County. So this has been Season 1, Episode 2 of SADOC with Sandra, where we were on the couch with Mark Temons. Your mind is a weapon. When you pursue education, aim for elevation, and channel creativity into empowerment, then no door can hold you and no one can stop you. Your mouth is a weapon that can slay your doubts and insecurities. So speak life to yourself. And until next time, thank you for joining us. And thank you, Mark, again.
Thank you, Sandra.
Need this nugget of encouragement. Things will be alright, so quit your worrying. I get it. The odds can stack back against the wall, but even consider it such, no, you'll stand tall. Sat and watch from the sidelines one too many times. Wicked games we play make me wanna lose my mind. Found solitude, knowing it'll be over soon. Ever need a boost? Count on me for the 1-2. Trouble don't last when the tough get going. Baby, all we do is win, so show me my opponent. Adversity, doubt, stress, could care less, cause how we handle those like an S on our chest.